Out of all the stuff to have been announced in upcoming Path of Fire, the second expansion for Guild Wars 2, I think it's safe to say that the real show winner has been mounts. Mounts are one of those big features you tend to find in a lot of MMOs, and bizarrely, Guild Wars, though being one of the biggest franchises on the scene, for over a decade, has never actually gone into. Never did it, not once. Not until now. And so this is a big moment to introducing the franchise to people who have written it off before because they only like MMOs with mounts. But the thing is with this franchise is that it's always tried to take other stuff that's on the scene and innovate or twist it in some way, improve on what has been generally a very stagnant genre. So the fact that mounts are coming with Path of Fire isn't just big because we've never seen them before, it's big because people are curious how ArenaNet have added their own flavor and twist on such a classic feature. It's the kind of thing that if they didn't do it right, they'd alienate a lot of their established fan base that always felt they were better than needing mounts in their online MMOs. So, I recently realized that for all I've talked about Path of Fire, and indeed mounts too on the official post show I was able to host, I haven't given you guys a dedicated production on pretty much everything we know about them. That's what this is going to be today, fill you guys in on the gaps you may have missed, or give you a sweet linkable video that you can show to people only casually interested to see everything that's arriving. So let's jump in.
In Path of Fire, we wanted to build upon the mastery system that we started with Heart of Thorns.
So we're introducing mounts for the first time into Guild Wars 2. Historically in games, mounts are about traveling fast. To us, mounts are so much more.
A phrase we use a lot in the office is the joy of movement. It should feel exciting to move across the Alolan Desert in a variety of ways.
Now, you probably don't need me to tell you this at the start of this video, but despite the risk it seemed in introducing a system like mounts to this franchise, they were actually incredibly well received by the community so far. And that's because while many MMOs will cop out and a mount is simply a way of getting increased movement speed, Guild Wars 2's mounts do a lot more than that. And in fact, if you really think about it, if Guild Wars 2 added mounts that were just movement speed enhancements, it really wouldn't fit. This is a game where you can teleport around all over the place using waypoints. It's a game where you already have movement speed enhancing effects as a part of the combat system. It's a game even where the gem shop allows you to buy special toys that you can ride around in a mount style, like the electromagnetic ascender or the magic carpet. No, adding mounts that are just movement speed would not have cut the mustard. So the devs went above and beyond. It seems that they had a dedicated team for 2 years working to flesh this thing out, and it really shows. First thing to understand is mounts as a part of progression in this game. As everyone knows, for the Guild Wars franchise, you can hit level cap fairly quickly, and the idea is from there there's a lot of horizontal and cosmetic progression you can go for, instead of perpetual gear grind, loot treadmills, and the invalidation of older content as people get power crept beyond it every time a new expansion drops. With Heart of Thorns, they introduced us to the idea of the mastery system. It was to provide meaningful things for us to do by earning experience that wasn't necessarily going level 81, level 82, level 83. Examples of this were learning to commune with the denizens of the jungle and speak their language, or being able to glide. Now, of all of the Heart of Thorns masteries, it was the gliding mastery that got the warmest reception. You'd start off first getting a very small glider that you couldn't be in the air for very long on, to eventually be able to lean on it, to eventually be able to go through special updrafts and even infinitely glide. The gliding mastery was kind of like a precursor to mounts, and when they set out for the Path of Fire expansion, the developers doubled down on that. In fact, everything that there is to do post level 80 progression in this expansion revolves around acquiring new mounts and training those mounts as your companions to be able to do more and more impressive things. Similar to how in Heart of Thorns, you couldn't cross certain areas or access various regions of the world unless you could glide or even efficiently glide, the same thing is true for mounts. These are not necessarily optional parts of the game that you will have a choice to go for or not in various prestige areas. They are a fundamental aspect of how we explore the new region of the world, the Crystal Desert, and the southern areas of Elona beyond. For example, the second map that we go to in the expansion is actually a mountainous region with snow, but to traverse that place effectively, we will need to find find and tame a beast of the wild known as a Springer. There's basically a giant bunny / kangaroo that will get us to those high out of reach places. So every single mount has not only progression involved with it and the ability to train it and teach it to do more important and more impressive things, but also each mount will be a fundamental aspect of our character progression. Given this, it seems that shortly after the expansion releases, and we'll go into regular content updates again with Living World Season 4, we'll probably get another mount at that point that over the year we bond with and teach to be better and better and better. I think this fundamentally is the main reason why mounts have been so warmly received. It's because the game is kind of built around them and there's a huge amount of focus on them instead of them just being a little thing that's been dipped in there to pander to a demographic that the MMO doesn't currently reach, something I think those more cynical of us might expect from an aging MMO developer. I would also make the argument that another huge reason they've been warmly received is just the amount of polish and detail and love that has gone into the system in general. First of all, each of the new beasts we can tame are dyeable, and they're dyeable with the complete color palette of, what is it, over 200 dyes that are currently available in game. So if you want a red Raptor, then you can go for a red Raptor. If you want a blue one, that's fine. If you want to go for a pink one or any other color under the sun that you may already have unlocked for your account. The dye system could have gone a little bit further, I feel, in that it could have given us more than one area of the mount to dye, an extra dye channel, but maybe that's something that we'll be looking at for future mounts or monetization options in the game in the future. But I think a lot of us weren't even expecting that ability to be able to customize our mounts, and well, the dyeing was a nice extra surprise. We even got a little preview of how several of the future mounts will dye on a developer live stream very recently, which you can see in the background here. One of the first things I tried to do when I was on a mount was execute an emote, so tell it to sit down, wave at my friends, things like this. Those unfortunately aren't a part of mounts, and that has been a disappointment to me, but each does have a selection of idle animations that have been super well received. So if you stand about not doing anything on your Raptor for long enough, eventually it will get tired and sit down. And there are other animations too, like the Raptor has quite an interesting one where it tries to shake the player character off, who then gets quite visibly perturbed by the fact that this happened. So we don't have total control over mount emotes, but they are there. The second mount, the Springer, has kind of this cute thing where it licks sand and stuff off of its face and out of its ears. The third mount, the Skimmer, has this little spin thing, and so on. Hopefully the devs will give us more control over that in the future, but I think it's a really good start. The next thing that many are excited about with Guild Wars 2's mounts is the fact that the devs rebuilt the movement system entirely just for the way that these mounts handle. There's a little bit of delay as you control them, so they really do feel like separate entities to you. They accelerate and de-accelerate differently. They treat hills differently than player character movement does, and sometimes that's been a little bit buggy, but I'm assuming that's just because of the pre-release demos and will be ironed out by the time it actually releases. And even the third mount, the Skimmer, is a floating creature that has a completely different style of movement where you essentially hover around on a packet of air beneath the creature. It's by far, hands down, my favorite mount of the whole selection, and it's kind of a mix of Heart of Thorns gliding with how it feels to ride a Ghost, the vehicle in the Halo franchise, if anyone knows what I'm talking about. It allows you to seamlessly move over water, which you can now skip having to swim in altogether, to smooth terrain above land, and even rocky and bumpy terrain that anything else would have to be jumping and clambering around on. The Skimmer can just glide gracefully across, and all that new movement has required them to create new friction controls and a variety of different fun things just to make that guy work. And I think that that's really where people have become impressed. And last but not least, I myself, as a bit of a story geek, as a bit of a lore nerd, I'm very excited about the story that's coming up in the expansion. And not only are these a fundamental aspect of character progression, but also they're supposedly integrated into the story quite heavily. We've already seen that in pre-release demos where it's actually a part of the story to save a burning village, who then give you a Raptor out of gratitude that characters then later in the story are already remarking on and talking about.
Looks like the Raptor's taken to you. Keep it. For your help.
Are you sure?
One less Raptor's the least of our problems.
Thanks.
It'll help you cover ground faster. You'll need it.
So my guess would be that in future maps and as the story progresses even further, the new creatures you find will be just as integrated as this first one, or hopefully even more so. The final mount is a living sand wolf that has been brought back to life by runes etched across its body, and the devs have even hinted that it's got some kind of story in the lore that people have been curious about. And I love that idea that as we progress deeper into the expansion, we'll get these assets, these mounts for us, but they're not so much a gameplay feature, but they are characters, every bit as much an extension of our character and the story than just, oh, here's another thing on a checklist, kind of like how gliding and the mastery system was. So there you go. That's really the big ticket items as to why people have been excited about mounts. Digging a little bit deeper now for the rest of the video on nitty-gritty details for those a little bit more in tune with the game and are curious how this stuff functions. There is, of course, a lot to go through because the game's never really had anything like this. Do mounts have their own health bars, you might wonder? Do they have their own endurance, you might wonder? How does fall damage work? What kind of actions can I take place on a mount? Can I carry environmental weapons on them? These are all things to go over. But generally, I believe the answer to everything I just said a second ago is yes. They do have their own health bars, you just can't see it. They do have their own endurance separate to yours, and so on. So how does it work? Well, once you've got a mount, anyone who plays a lot of Guild Wars 2 will be familiar that you've got a skill bar, and on the left of it, there's a weapon swap icon. Well, now on the right of it, there's a corresponding mount icon. So if you click this, you get on the mount. You can bind it in your options to any key you like. I believe by default it's X. Of course, they're not going to force you to be a skill clicker. And so by hitting this, you'll pull the mount out and get on it at any point. This is not an MMO that favors immersive features at the cost of convenience. Guild Wars 2 is an MMO that favors convenience over immersiveness. And so some of you guys might like the BDO style, for example, where you have to go to a specific stable to find your mount and then you get on it and you move around. Guild Wars 2 doesn't do things like that. It allows you to get on your mount at any point. It feels a bit unintuitive and weird to just pull a mount out of nowhere, but this means that you can get it wherever you want and there's sort of no busy work involved. And I know that that's something a lot of the Guild Wars community are big fans of. Now, by pressing X or just clicking the icon, you can get on your mount, but by right-clicking that icon, you'll actually be given a small window that you can see here, which allows you to choose which of the new mounts you want to ride. And that's going to be 4 right at the start of the expansion coming out, and then presumably they might expand it as time goes along. So depending on who you pick here, the Raptor, the Skimmer, the Springer, then the next time you click the icon regularly, that instead will be what you ride. There's other key binding options which aren't bound by default that allow you to just press a button and instantly get on any mount of your choice. So if I press F1, I'll get on the bunny. If I press F2, then I'll get on the Raptor, F3 another one, and so on. So people who really want to min-max in that way, you can totally do that. So once you are on the mount, your movement will change, and that's going to be dependent on the mount you chose. Riding around a Raptor will feel very different to hopping along on the bunny, to playing the teleportation wolf, for example, or especially the Skimmer. But your entire skill bar will change as well. As you'll notice, it disables all of your skills. So the idea of mounts is not to completely usurp the combat of the game. A huge part of this MMO is elite specializations, and people will want to play with regular weapons. They'll want to play with all that stuff that they've had before and all the fresh new toys. It'd be a bit naff if instead all you ever did was see your mount skill bar and it was purely about mounted combat. But mounted combat is a fun idea. So the devs struck a best of both worlds situation where you do get a combat ability on each mount and it's upgradable as you train with the mounts, but this is more of an engage skill rather than something you do the entire fight on. So the Raptor, for example, has this skill 1 ability. As you execute it, you'll leap in an area, suck all the enemies that you manage to land next to into a point and do damage to them. But at that point, when you use that engage skill, you will get off of your mount and go back to your regular skill bar so that you can use all your fun new elite specialization stuff. While you're in combat, you cannot remount. So what this means is if you're traveling around in the world on Raptor back and something hits you, you will be fine and you'll stay in combat. But if you choose to get off of that Raptor, you have to use your regular combat abilities to finish the fight, either by running away or killing your foe before you can get back onto the creature. And in this way, they've struck a balance between regular combat and mounted combat or mounted engages. The mastery system plays with that in interesting ways, but I guess we don't have to get into that detail too much right here. So each mount has a different combat engage ability. When I go mount by mount in a second, we'll talk about those, but that's the general balance that they've tried to strike, and I think that that's the perfect way to deal with it as well. I'd really hate it if all the things I came to love about Guild Wars 2's combat I never interacted with anymore because I was just using overpowered mount stuff all the time. That would sort of suck. As far as combat is concerned with mounts as well, internally they supposedly do have their own health. I'm not sure what happens if someone manages to kill your mount while you're on it, but if you fall from a great height on, say, the Raptor, that mount will actually die and kick you off. But there's no cooldown on once it's dead, you can then get straight back on and move about. Being on a mount is essentially like eliminating full damage because the mount itself will take it instead of you. And you might think that's really weird, why have they done that? Well, most of these mounts have got big capabilities when it comes to traversing the environment, and that means crossing massive gaps or jumping very high or doing things that will put you at full damage peril a lot, and I think that they just found the game was more enjoyable when it wasn't such a great risk that you could instantly die and have to waypoint a million miles away. So that's another thing that's happened with the expansion 2. There is a fundamental question on many people's minds. Why mounts? Because Guild Wars 2 has all these waypoints everywhere. And what's the point when we can already move very quickly? Well, the point is that the new maps have been made much bigger. There are 5 maps in this expansion, which is more than the previous had. But each individual map as well covers much more terrain, and they have much fewer waypoints available there. So if you really want to effectively cross these new regions in the desert and beyond, you will be wanting to do mounted travel. The game just doesn't feel quite the same without it after you've managed to get a bit of an experience, as I came to learn in the early demos. So that's the way the devs have made that work for the new maps, as well as the fact many areas in the new maps are inaccessible until you earn a special mount ability to climb very high or jump across a big chasm or glide to a certain place. But it also is a function in regular Guild Wars 2 too, where there are tons of waypoints. So really mounts are about the new areas and about playing in the new areas, and they work beautifully there. But the devs didn't feel the need to restrict us to only gaining access to them in the new maps. They also, just for funsies, will be available everywhere in all the earlier areas of Guild Wars 2 that we've been playing in for the past 5 years. So something similar happened with gliding, if you guys remember. Gliding was added with Heart of Thorns, and originally it was just in the jungle maps, and there didn't really seem to be much need for it in Corteria, but it was a fun idea. So eventually, in a patch several months after Heart of Thorns, they put it in there, and everybody had fun. They did a huge balance pass across the entire game world to make sure that you weren't gliding out of bounds on maps or breaking things. Well, they did that for this expansion too, but instead of having to wait a few months for it to come in, it's just arriving instantly. So once Path of Fire triggers, you can go to the desert, find a raptor, tame it, make it your buddy, and then return to the regular world with it. You can ride around in Queensdale and all the original maps, even the Heart of Thorns jungle maps on your raptor. So yeah, that means you can be on your mounted raptor while fighting against the mounted raptor Mordrum enemies from 2 years ago in the previous expansion. Very thrilling idea, and especially as well when you think about the fact that all these mounts have different movement controls. So one of the more recent maps that was added to the game takes place on the inside of a hollow volcano, and in that hollow volcano is an ocean of boiling sea that you'll die in if you touch. When Path of Fire comes out, you'll be able to ride a skimmer around on that map, and it will feel very, very different traversing those areas. Same for any of the previous mountainy maps, which now will be able to climb much quicker and maneuver around much faster. And I've been trying very hard to not speculate about how broken the teleporting wolf is going to be in the core maps. Many people did ask that, and the devs just went for it. They did the big balance boss, and there it is. So that's a broad overview of the way that mounts function, why people have liked them so much. Let's talk about the mounts themselves for a second and lay it on the line exactly what Path of Fire has given us. Now, there are only 4, but I wouldn't judge that as a problem necessarily. A lot of MMOs will bloat the number of mounts they add just because they're crappy, tacky reskins on what is essentially the same thing. Each of these 4 mounts is very different in what it can pull off. And so let's deal with this. The first one is the Raptor. It's associated with the first map of the expansion, and it seems that that's what the devs are doing. You get one mount from one map, then as you explore further, you get a different mount from the next, and so on and so on. So the first one we get is the Raptor. The player base has already had a hands-on with this guy if they had attended any of the demo events or stress tests. The Raptor can move very quickly around the desert, and his special movement ability is a long-distance leap. So this special movement ability kind of replaces your dodge roll while you're on mount back. So remember how Guild Wars 2 was acclaimed for having this dodge roll mechanic that you can execute at any point, and it felt really fun and nice? Well, mounts key into that as well. They have their own dodge roll, if you will, but it's not a dodge, it's a special movement ability. It uses the mount's endurance, and different mounts' abilities cost different amounts of endurance, or they have different endurance pools. Like the final mount actually has a big endurance pool, and this is how you you are executing some of these new abilities that get you into new areas of the world in terms of progression. So if you're in the desert and you see there's a huge chasm with a massive gap you should never be able to get across, what you probably want to do is tame a raptor, train in the desert with said raptor, and teach it how to do a really long distance jump. So the default jump is already way further than most players can get. I think there's a couple of profession skills that can come close. And then the other one is like an enormous super long range jump that is quite ridiculous, honestly. So that's his movement ability. He also has a combat ability, of course, which I already talked about. You jump up, you pull enemies in, and then you kind of go ham on them as the fight begins. So that's the raptor. Moving quickly on, we have the Springer. So map 2 does take place in some mountainous regions, and as such, the Springer is all about verticality. So when we look at the previous expansion, there was lots of layers to everything. You had the jungle roots, and then you had the ground, and then you had high up in the sky. You had maps like Tangled Depths where it was just a horrible mess of navigation. Path of Fire is sort of the reverse of that. Most of the maps are very wide and spread out, and they take great advantage of this extra movement speed that the mounts are giving you. But the second map, at least, is about verticality, definitely, in that you have all these high cliffs and mountainous environment for you to explore. You do this with the Springer, who gets a special jump, and I'm very much looking forward to that experience of climbing up a mountain, but with the Springer in mind, where there are these truly vast distances we're properly climbing that our regular player character could never hope to have done. Another way to describe this would be that the Raptor is about horizontal leaps, and the Springer, who you get next, is about vertical leaps. Some of you guys might be wondering at this point, when you do one of these big leaps, if you're in both expansions, can you then break out into a glide and fly along? And some of us were speculating that could be possible. I was hoping that could be possible, especially with this second mount. The devs actually did confirm that it's not possible, just because this would be a really profound advantage that players of both expansions would have, and they didn't want people to feel like they had to spend that much money in order to get an advantage like this, and they weren't designing maps specifically to account for such a crazy game-breaking combo. So who knows, maybe at some point in the future we'll have specific situations where we can do this, but not so much. As a small compensation, by the way, essentially, and when you mount and then you climb off of a mount, it's sort of like a double jump now, and you can glide out of that kind of double jump, and you can get some extra impressive distance from that, but that's kind of just a weird, small, nerdy thing I noticed, and is nothing like, you know, gliding at the top of a Springer jump. So the Springer's ability, their combat ability, is kind of like a slam ability, as far as I can understand, where everybody gets knocked down. It's got this awesome roll animation that you can see here as it spirals down, and I think that you can trigger it from midair, so you can jump high in the air on the Springer, and then execute your combat ability to slam back down and knock everyone down. Hopefully it will have some use, but it seems a little bit more difficult to pull off than the Raptor's Engage. I will point out as well at this point that even though you get the Springer in map 2, where all the mountainous stuff is, you can take that Springer back to the first map, and there you will find tons of cliffs, which we've already experienced in the demos. Tons of super high up cliffs and places that you couldn't access before that now you can. That kind of Metroidvania style of gameplay that the mastery system was always going for is absolutely preserved, and it's just like in Heart of Thorns, where the first time you go to the first map you can hardly glide and it's all very intimidating and scary, and later you can return and you've got all these new places available to you. That's totally true with the Springer and the later ones also. Here you go, that's the Springer. Moving on, we have mount number 3. This is the Skimmer. So this seems to be something we get as we go further south. And perhaps it's used to get across dangerous quicksands and various waterlogged areas that otherwise would be untraversable. As I said, the Skimmer is definitely my favorite mount. Completely changes the movement in the game. You float and almost permanently, perpetually glide over everything. It's essentially like a hovercraft. Really fun. There are places in the demo we experienced where you have like an island way out in the water that you cannot climb out of the water to get onto because it's too high. And the only way you'd be able to do such a thing is on the Skimmer, where you can just glide across the top of the water and then execute a small Skimmer jump to get there. I really love what the Skimmer stands for. I think it's very, very fun. I'm excited to take it back to earlier maps like Blood-Tide Coast or Straits of Devastation, Draconis Mons that I mentioned earlier. So you might notice that because the Skimmer's movement just by baseline is so weird, it almost doesn't need a special ability that it uses endurance to execute. in order to go to new places in the environment, because it's already unlocking stuff because it's just so fun to move around on anyway. But it does get a special ability. As far as I can tell, it's like a big jump and like vague looking glide thing, though it's not as long term as a Heart of Thorns glider glide. So I think that's what they get. The devs have been a little bit more non-specific about this as we get further into the expansion, and they don't want to spoil how things go, of course. There's an interesting component as well of the Skimmer. If you're going over water on it, or if you're going over quicksand, which is a new mechanic in the maps that just does tons of damage to you and CCs you, and you kind of need a Skimmer to cross. If you're going over those, you get another movement change where you have even less friction as you're traveling around, so you can really feel the difference as you're on a Skimmer over those areas, and you get a speed boost while you're on those places too. So, as for the combat ability on the Skimmer, I actually have no idea what it is or what it could be, and that's true as well for the final 4th mount, and that's the Jackal. So, the Jackal is a wolf that we're riding, right? But it's made of shifting sands that have been brought to life. It's not a real creature, really. It's sands that have been reanimated by these runes. The devs have hinted that there's supposedly interesting lore with this. I feel like maybe I should know a bit more, but I'm not quite sure what they might be hinting at. Perhaps the Staff of the Mists, because it can manipulate the physical world, and we might be getting the Jackal around the same area of the world as to where I would have expected that staff to have been destroyed, or where we last saw it. So maybe something to do with that. Possibly related to Palawa Joko, we'll have to see. But this guy will probably be the most interesting in terms of the stories. The last one we'll get, so the story will be getting quite climactic by the time we grab this guy. And they ride around in a very similar way to the Raptor, but their special ability is you can execute it 3 times in a row. They get 3 dodges, essentially, a bit like Daredevils from Heart of Thorns. And it's a teleport. So you can jump in the air and execute a brief, sort of a short-range teleport. And while still falling in midair, you can execute another one and another one and another one. So you can jump and teleport around corners. You can teleport off of a cliff and then back to where you landed after you've done whatever you wanted to do in the other place, as long as you did it quick enough before gravity has affected you too much. So it's a really weird effect. They've built a lot of interesting jumping puzzles, supposedly, in the new expansion that are built around riding the new mounts, and especially when it comes to this last one, they seem to have had a lot of fun. The devs have talked about there being specific new portals in the maps that when you jump into these portals on the Jackal, you'll get teleported to really distant locations, and the portals preserve the momentum you had on your mount as you're traveling through them. So you'll have to like jump through a portal, and then you'll be falling through the air, and then you have to teleport and find another one to get through another. It's going to be really thrilling. I'm very, very curious what they do with the jumping puzzles in this expansion, because those have always been high points of map exploration in this MMO. And so that's the Jackal. As for the combat ability, I'm not too sure. Maybe that information is out there somewhere, and the comments can help. So, generally speaking, those are the 4 mounts. Lastly, some other little nitty-gritty things you guys might want to know about mounts as they will exist in Guild Wars 2. First, let's talk about skins. So, obviously, that's a cash cow for an MMO. Obviously, it's something that ArenaNet would be insane not to look into. Obviously, it would be really cool to be able to reskin my Raptor into either just having more dye channels, or be spiky, or some subtle changes, or even like really amazing, crazy, wild skins that completely change the appearance of the Raptor into, I don't know, like a Corgi, or a Destroyer Raptor, or a Mordrum Raptor, and so on. Whether the devs will do this, though, is not yet confirmed. You would think it would be. By the time Heart of Thorns was releasing, they'd already shown us that skins for gliders were a thing, but not the case for mounts just yet. We will see what they announce and whether they'll take the time to do it, but I think it could be a really fun thing, and hopefully they do some very interesting stuff. Where we only get these 4 different creatures, I see mount skins as being an opportunity for us to ride a lot of stuff that we currently can't, like Dollyaks and so on. We'll see. Next thing that I've noticed about the mount system is that, yes, we get a new mount per map, it seems, but also in Path of Fire, there will be heart quests in the open world maps. This was something the previous expansion never had time to do, or they just didn't think to do. Well, it seems that probably in each new map, there will be a repeatable daily heart quest you can do that is designed purely for playing with your mount. So the one we've seen in the demos already is the Raptor one, where you get to run around giving it fireflies to eat. There's a special vendor at the end which has a special item tab called the Mount tab, which presumably you can feed your mount daily and get different rewards or have fun things like that. Items that we haven't been introduced to yet that really dig even further into the mount system and we'll have to wait on. But it seems that there's probably going to be a heart like that for the Raptor in the first map, and then there'll be one for the Springer where, I don't know, maybe we're collecting fireflies again, but this time in the mountains, and then there'll be one for the Skimmer, and so on and so on. Has a nice little touch and something I'm looking forward to. Spices up the way that the heart events will be running in the new expansion. The other thing I want to make clear to you guys is there are certain things you cannot do while mounted in the game. And it's not just emotes, but there are actual gameplay ramifications to it. So some of you might have already been thinking, wow, what if I run around on a really fast mount in Corteria and just gather things, chop down trees and get herbs and get mining nodes and so forth, and I'll be rich because I can move so fast. Well, the devs have made it so that you can't gather while you're on a mount. You dismount and then automatically, and then you start mining, and then you can get back on. Now, that might seem that it's just because they never wanted to make animations, but I think it goes a bit deeper than that. I think what the devs are doing is they're saying, okay, while you are gathering, you're vulnerable to being attacked by foes, and if they attack you, they'll put you in combat, and remember, you cannot remount while in combat. So this is one of those little things. The same happens when speaking to various NPCs and story steps. This is one of those little things that will mean you do get off of the mount every now and then, and it's not just permanently running around at these insane speeds all the time. There will be a bit of regular combat in there. That also has an interesting effect on stuff like revive orbs, right? So in Guild Wars 2, you can instantly revive anywhere you like without having to waypoint by using a revive orb, but it puts you in combat for a full minute after you do it. Well, you won't be able to mount after that full minute. Things like that. And, well, there we go. We're about half an hour into this showcase for today's video, so I think I'll leave it there, guys. That's a good overview, I think, and all the really big details that you need to know about how Guild Wars 2 is doing mounts. They do seem very, very fun to me, and this is coming from someone who's been very cynical about the feature ever since it was leaked to exist several months ago. And I'm very pleased to have had my mind changed on them at that. If you want more testimonies or interesting facts about mounts, I'm sure there will be from our lovely community in the comments below, so be sure to check that out, guys. And if this video is convinced you that, yeah, Path of Fire is something that you're interested in, or you're looking at getting your mum, your nan, your sister, or whatever to pick up the game, please do remember that in the top of my description, there's a link. If you click that, you can find the buy page for the game straight away, and that also supports the channel to use that there. So thanks very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you for more Path of Fire good stuff very shortly. Only about 3 weeks till it releases.